It's time to grab a test tube and a clipboard in E1M4 Research Facility. So it's the finale map to the episode and it has no bosses. We're off to a great start. Just two shamblers that were from the original Quake and centroids that were all over this episode. The rest of the map is just a straight line for the most part, never really feels like you're given much breathing room to explore. The funny thing is the closest thing to a boss stand-in, the shamblers were actually very easily taken down thanks to a nearby quad damage and window sniping. The last part of the map is literally just 4 centroids coming out one room at a time, and it's not even the only ones in this map. The sequence to the exit is kind of cool, but the map is still disappointing. It's time to arrange some boxes in E1M2 storage facility. I have to be honest, it's kind of disappointing after the first map, being much more linear with next to no diverging paths. Even the more unique parts of the map, like a force field bridge, a fan of death, and rotating platforms are shallow at best. The aesthetic doesn't look half bad, but you can say the same about the first map, and it had much more going for it. Using a delayed explosion to reach the secret exit is honestly the only thing this map offers that I thought was kind of interesting. The rest comes across as formulaic. It didn't introduce anything new since the centroids were seen already, and the map isn't even all that long either. I don't know who Tur is, but it doesn't sound good in E3M1 Tur Torment. Yeah, I'm gonna be honest, I really didn't like this map. I've said this before, I don't mind difficulty in and of itself, but spamming Vors on you isn't fun difficulty in my opinion. When you're stuck on a platform while unavoidable homing projectiles are heading towards you, it just comes across as cheap. The map itself at least isn't totally linear and has some diverging paths, so it has that going for it, but it still felt more annoying than not. The thrill of having a shambler that fights for you won't help this one either. It's time to go to the sides of Elder Scrolls in E3M6, The Edge of Oblivion. Well, if you enjoyed the Fortress of Mystery, I have good news for you. It's basically just a series of ramps with enemies all over the freaking place. Special note goes to the abundance of long-ranged shamblers and homing Vors just specifically to make your life more difficult. Given the map is surrounded by darkness, you'd almost expect low gravity, but after Ziggurat Vertigo, I'm grateful it isn't. There aren't any secrets in this map. The only obscure thing is an elevator behind you with a hittable switch. Other than that, literally tons of ramps with enemy traps into the exit. You probably haven't heard of this map because it's underground. E2M5 The Catacombs. If you thought I was going to start out complaining about it being too linear, welcome back, regular viewer, and yes, it's very linear. Thematically, it's fine, with a trip through caverns, a castle, and yes, catacombs. Well, at least it introduces the Malnir, not to be confused with Marvel if you want to smite foes with bolts. However, I'm ranking the maps, not the weapons, and the map itself doesn't have that much going for it. It has some visually nice areas, but that's not going to be enough for me to deem it anything special. How low can you go in E3M3 Limbo? Yeah, I knew this map was going to be an experience when it starts out with a shambler. The one noteworthy part of the map other than that is the silver key room with a trap of monsters to deal with. The visuals still look fine by Quake standards, but it feels like they're running out of ideas and are just throwing things at you. Vors and shamblers and fiends can only get you so far when you've seen them already and are becoming predictable. Ultimately, it's another map that doesn't swing far towards spectacular or abysmal, it's just there. The gloves come off in E3M4 The Gauntlet. Yep, this map gave me the same overall feeling as most of the maps, a half-hearted shrug. I'll grant it that it has some level of challenge and isn't infuriating, but it has nothing new except new spiked walls with 3 shootable switches to escape. Other than that, it's just another one of those go straight ahead for most of the part and fight to the exit maps. There really isn't that much that feels new with Vors, Shamblers, Ogres, etc. This is the penultimate map too, which is a real shame because Computer Station on Doom 1 and The Living End on Doom 2 to name others are so good. We pay respect to the little green guys in E2M6, the Gremlins domain. It's linear and most of the actual difficulty is from 2 Shamblers. I will give it credit for one thing though, the Gremlins are more smartly placed and one did actually steal my super shotgun without me standing still. Other than that one surprising moment though, it feels like any other Quake map for the most part. It's just not noteworthy for good or bad and feels like it was made to fill out the episode really. I will credit it for opening up shortcuts, which is something that always pleases me, but that doesn't make the map anything special. It's time to observe the dead in E2M5 Mortem's Keep. Yep, another finale map that doesn't have an actual boss in it. Well, unless you count the power generator zapping you along with the shambler spam, I personally don't. As I've pretty much come to expect, the map is mostly a straight line, but at least an optional mode helps a little. And even though it doesn't really qualify as a real boss, that power generator certainly added a wrinkle to things for challenge. I'm a little bit conflicted because it still doesn't have a unique boss, but at least it offers much more than the other episode finale. It's time to become like Zorro in E1M3 The Lost Mine. I'm beginning to think that first map was an outlier and the rest of these just aren't going to live up to it. The gimmick of this one, as you might have expected, is a mineshaft, complete with falling rocks and tight-roping minecart rails. Well, that and the tumbling rocks leading into the exit that seem impossible to avoid taking damage from. Unfortunately, this map is just as linear as any other, with next to no room for diverging from the intended path. The one interesting part is a brief Indiana Jones-style rock coming down on you and the elevator out showing its progress down, but that's about it. There's honestly not that much good to say about this map other than at least it's a unique location. It's time to get infected by the devil in E3M2 Pandemonium, not to be confused with the better Doom map of the same name. Well, this map doesn't actively annoy me, so you might say that's a step in the right direction. It's as linear as you would expect, but at least it makes decent use of 3D space to add a few layers. Having pillars falling down before a platform leads you to a switch was admittedly also kind of cool. Really though, while this map doesn't have anything genuinely bad in it, I also wish so many of these maps weren't this straightforward in how they're played. There are exceptions out there, even in this expansion pack, so I know it's possible. It's time to storm E3M5 Armagon's lair. This might just be one of the weakest boss map designs ever with just one room and just Armagon, but I will also acknowledge that he is a bit of a saving grace. Unlike most bosses, you can't really just strafe around the entire time. He seems to angle and lead his shots to trip you up. While you can sort of cheese him by keeping extreme distance, I'll acknowledge that he puts up a decent fight. The cutscene you get for beating him and the explanation to what happened was also at least better than Shub. The map is still just a room except a cutscene, but at least it has a boss and a pretty good one at that. It's time to drop and give me 20, soldier, in E1M5 Military Complex. It's an alright map, but definitely falls short of Doom's similarly themed military base secret map. Centroids and instant death water fans just aren't doing it for me if I'm being honest. Well, at least you get to choose which of 3 switches to go for first, standing as the single most non-linear section, and it's pretty short-lived. And at least there's more secrets to be found, including one moderate-sized optional area you might mistake for decoration. Ultimately though, the map does make good use of 3D space and returning to areas in new ways, but doesn't have enough room for exploring in my opinion. It's time to respect the Dark Knight in E2M2 The Black Cathedral. I know I tend to beef on linear maps, but this might actually be an example of a pretty good one. Maybe it's because it compensates with both difficult spots and pretty unique areas. Probably the most interesting is a church with a depiction of Christ who smites you if you try to shoot it. It's also one of the few times I was forced to not run with collapsing floors along a path of lava, which I thought was pretty neat. Sometimes you just have to acknowledge when a map is fun to play and able to compensate for shortcomings. It's terror time again in E2M4 The Crypt. Admittedly, I was expecting this to be another straight-lined level, but there's actually a few good optional areas I didn't see until I reached the exit. This is what I want from maps, just something to reward poking around and going off the beaten path. It also helps that the map has a pretty massive sense of scale, giving it a nice spacious feeling. It has a similar castle and crypts theme, but it expands on the coffins with zombies and fiends coming out of them. Even without multiple paths to a location, having room to poke around really makes a difference. It's time to face Armagon's hydraulic scourge in E1M1 The Pumping Station. This is actually a pretty decent starter map, not up to the sewage system, but certainly comparable to the Slipgate Complex or the installation. It's not the most open map on the planet, but it has enough diverging paths to reward looking around. This includes a proximity launcher that's like a sticky bomb, going off if enemies get too close. Thematically, it's not the most original map, but destroying a pumping station by shooting a rocket into a pipe to access it was pretty neat, despite the convenient explosive barrel inside of it. It even introduces the Centroid, a cyborg scorpion with nail guns. Definitely much cooler than the cyborg scorpion at 0 Hour, I'm just saying. So yeah, it's a pretty good starting map and paints a pretty promising picture for the expansion. It's time to dust off the portals in E2M1 Ancient Realms. Well, if you like challenge, this episode certainly starts out punching with Vorzen Shamblers. Gremlins, however, are slow and easy to kill. Keeping a mild distance makes their one unique trait, weapon stealing, useless. To the map's credit, there's a good amount of explorative choices with switches to bring down the silver key. There's also a good amount of secrets to be uncovered, including a secret exit, interestingly enough. Overall, very good starter map. I just hope the quality doesn't drop afterwards like the past episode. This Scourge by Armagon needs to be given an overview. The best way I can describe the maps as a whole is mediocre and wasted potential. Other than minor annoyances, the maps overall never really get any worse than a shrug or disappointment. Of course, a certain third episode starting map had some severely annoying elements in it, but even it had redeeming factors. Armagon himself is definitely the best boss Quake 1 has offered up so far, since you actually have to overcome him and not just press switches or telefrag. It's only a shame that the maps can be less linear overall and have more room for exploration. It's not a bad expansion by any means, check it out, but it's not quite golden era of classic FPSs, at least not for me.